Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Diary of a Lawyer. And I want to cover the report in the Human Rights Watch publication that touches and concerns the alleged potential crimes against humanity, as they put it, where apparently those alleged mass killings of Ethiopian migrants at the Yemeni south borders by the Saudi Arabian guards. The report published by the Human Rights Watch NGO, which is also reported widely globally in papers like New York Times and Guardian Times, says that the claim that people were fired on them like rain. And there's a summary where there's a verbatim quote from a 14-year-old known as, according to the Human Rights Watch report, Hamadia, which is spelled Hamdiya, which says that the 14-year-old allegedly says, and I quote, "We were fired on repeatedly. I saw people killed in a way I've never imagined. I saw 30 killed people on the spot. I pushed myself under a rock and slept there. I could feel people sleeping around me. I realized what I thought were people sleeping around me were actually dead bodies. I woke up and I was alone." And that was Hamadia, a 14-year-old, according to the Human Rights Watch report. The report summarizes and states that summer border guards killed at least hundreds of Ethiopian migrants and asylum seekers who tried to cross the Yemen-Saudi border between March 22 and June 23. The Human Rights Watch research indicates that at the time of writing, the killings are continuing, and that's what they say in the video at the time of writing. Saudi border guards have used explosive weapons and shot people at close range, including women and children, in a pattern that is widespread and systematic. If committed as part of a Saudi government policy to murder migrants, these killings would be a crime against humanity. And in some instances, Saudi border guards first asked survivors in which limb of their body they preferred to be shot before shooting them at close range. Saudi border guards also fired explosive weapons at migrants who had just been released from temporary Saudi detention and were attempting to flee back to Yemen. It is estimated that approximately 750,000 Ethiopians live and work in Saudi Arabia. While many migrate for economic reasons, a number have fled because of serious human rights abuses by the government, including during the recent brutal armed conflict in northern Ethiopia. Ethiopian migrants have for decades attempted the dangerous migration route known as the Eastern Route, or sometimes the Yemen route, from the Horn of Africa across the Gulf of Aden through Yemen and into Saudi Arabia. It is estimated that well over 90% of the migrants on this route are Ethiopian. The route is also used by migrants from Somalia and Eritrea, and occasionally other East African nations. In recent years, there has been an increase in the proportion of women and girls migrating on the Eastern Route, according to the Human Rights Watch. Now, migrants and asylum seekers describe their journey to the Yemen-Saudi border as rife with abuse and controlled by a network of smugglers and traffickers who physically assaulted them to extort payments from family members or contacts in Ethiopia or Saudi Arabia. Since the armed conflict began in Yemen in 2014, both the government and the Houthi armed group have detained migrants in poor conditions and exposed them to abuse. In 2014, Human Rights Watch documented abuses including torture of migrants in detention camps in Yemen run by traffickers attempting to extort payments. In 2018, Human Rights Watch documented how Yemeni guards tortured and raped Ethiopian and other migrants and asylum seekers from the Horn of Africa at a detention center in Aden, and worked in collaboration with smugglers to deport migrants in large groups to dangerous conditions at sea. In 2021, Human Rights Watch documented how scores of mostly Ethiopian migrants burned to death after Houthi forces launched projectiles into an immigration detention center in Sana'a, which they controlled, causing a fire. Yemen is also home to one of Africa's worst humanitarian crises, with the vast majority of the population reliant on aid to survive. Between January and June 2023, Human Rights Watch interviewed 42 Ethiopian migrants and asylum seekers by the telephone who tried to cross the border between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, or the friends and relatives of those who tried to cross. And it says that all attempted border crossings between March 22 and June 2023. Human Rights Watch also analyzed over 350 videos and photographs posted on social media or gathered from other sources filmed between May 12, 2021 and July 18, 2023, and several hundred square kilometers of satellite imagery captured between February 2022 and July 2023. These show dead and wounded migrants on the trails, in camps and in medical facilities, and how burial sites near the migrant camps grew in size, the expanding Saudi Arabian border security infrastructure, and the routes currently used by the migrants to attempt border crossings. Migrants and asylum seekers told Human Rights Watch that after crossing the Gulf of Aden from Djibouti to Aden on often life-threatening journeys in unseaworthy vessels, overcrowded and with limited food and water, Yemeni smugglers separated them into groups according to their Ethiopian ethnicity. Smugglers then took them to Sada Governorate, currently under the control of the Houthi armed group, also known as Ansar Allah, on the border with Saudi Arabia. They then took ethnic Tigrayans to an informal migrant settlement camp called Al-Raqqa, and ethnic Oromo to a camp called Al-Thabit, both in Sada. Many interviewees said Houthi forces control the entry and exit into the camps and work with the smugglers to control their stay in Sada. Houthi forces would often extort bribes from the migrants or transfer them to what migrants described as detention centers where people were abused until they could pay an exit fee. Sometimes Houthi forces would collect migrants injured during their crossing into Saudi Arabia from hospitals in Sada, even when they were injured from an attempted crossing, and forcibly return them to smugglers in the camps. Interviewees said that the camps in Sada contained tens of thousands of migrants waiting their turn to cross the border in Saudi Arabia. Many women and children regularly made crossing attempts in groups of up to 200 people. Migrants who traveled in large groups told Human Rights Watch that their groups had more women than men and a number of unaccompanied children. Those unable to pay the smuggler fees in full were often forced to lead the group and consequently were the most likely to be injured or killed by explosive weapons attacks or shootings. Saudi border guards were often sighted either patrolling the border area, holding rifles, or in cars or large vehicles with what interviewers said looked like rocket launchers mounted on the rear. Many migrants say they saw cameras tracking their movements mounted on what looked like street lamps on the Saudi side of the border. Now, whilst Human Rights Watch has previously documented killings of migrants at the border with Yemen and Arabia since 2014, the killings documented in this report appear to be a deliberate escalation in both the number and manner of targeted killings. The report shows how the pattern of abuses has changed from an apparent practice of occasional shootings and mass detentions, even that would be clearly catastrophic to an individual, but have escalated to widespread and systematic killings. Such killings would be crimes against humanity if they're both widespread and systematic and part of a state policy of deliberate murder of a civilian population. Migrants and asylum seekers describe the following violations as they attempted to cross into Saudi Arabia. They describe explosive weapon attacks. They describe large group crossings and losses of lives. And they also describe small group crossings, shootings at close range, and there were consequences of such attacks, which Human Rights Watch, when it interviewed many people, said people lost one or more limbs as a result of explosive weapons or shootings at the border and remain stranded in Yemen with limited or no health care and resources to live. People described an absence of medical treatment at both Al-Thabit and Arqab camps and Al-Ghal village, where survivors usually returned after an attack. Now, some made it to hospitals in Sada and other more severe cases to Sana'a. Usually the friends and relatives of the victims raised money to help migrants access medical care. Now, Human Rights Watch estimates that since the start of its investigations in January 2023, at least hundreds of largely Ethiopian migrants have been killed at the border with Saudi Arabia. That's hundreds. There has been no international mechanism mandated to monitor rights violations in Yemen, including abuses against migrants, since the United Nations Human Rights Council mandated group of eminent experts was disbanded in 2021 following pressure on council member states from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Yemeni regional and international civil society groups, including Human Rights Watch, continue to call on UN member states to fill this gap with a mechanism and aimed at monitoring the human rights situation in Yemen and investigating abuses with a view to laying the foundation for accountability and redress. Whilst the report is focused on widespread and systematic abuses committed by South border guards, Human Rights Watch notes that the Houthis play a significant role in perpetrating abuses against migrants along the migration route. Houthi forces' role in coordinating security and facilitating access to the border for smugglers and migrants in Sada Governorate, coupled with its practice of detaining and extorting migrants, allegedly amount to torture, arbitrary detention, and trafficking in persons. Now, in recent years, according to the Human Rights Watch report, Saudi Arabia has invested heavily in apparently deflecting attention from its what it calls abysmal human rights record at home and abroad, and apparently spending billions of dollars to host major entertainment, cultural and sporting events, which include Formula One sport, Grand Prix, and heavyweight boxing world title fights, purchasing football clubs like Newcastle United, which is in the English Premier League football team, and creating the LIV Golf Tour, which recently announced a merger with PGA Tour. It has also spent hundreds of millions of dollars on signing global soccer stars for the Saudi Professional League in 2023, such as Cristiano Ronaldo, Karim Benzema, and Sadio Mane. Now, the report has laid out a number of recommendations. That's the Human Rights Report. It says Saudi Arabia should immediately and urgently revoke any policy, whether explicit or de facto, to deliberately use lethal force on migrants and asylum seekers, including targeting them with explosive weapons and close-range attacks, and should urgently investigate and appropriately discipline or prosecute security personnel responsible for abuses, including unlawful killings, wounding, and torture at the Yemen border. It goes on to say that concerned governments should publicly call for the country to end any policy, whether explicit or in effect, to target migrants with explosive weapons and close-range attacks on the border with Yemen, and press for accountability for any senior Saudi officials credibly implicated in ongoing mass killings of migrants and asylum seekers. The report also recommends that in the interim, concerned governments should impose sanctions on Saudi and Houthi officials credibly implicated in ongoing violations at the border, including through facilitating smugglers' access to the border, as well as through detaining and extorting migrants. The Human Rights Report goes on to say that given the gravity of the abuses outlined in this report, a UN-backed investigation should be established into the killings and abuses against migrants and asylum seekers at the Yemen-Saudi border, including those documented in the report. Now, it also adds that Human Rights Watch calls on organizers and participants in major international events sponsored by the Saudi government to speak out publicly on rights issues or when whitewashing Saudi Arabia's human rights record, which is the primary purpose not to participate. The report concludes that for many years, Saudi Arabia has been one of the world's largest arms importers, and concerned governments should suspend any transfers of arms and other military equipment to Saudi Arabia, including arms, training, and maintenance agreements, and suspend any ongoing military training and cooperation with Saudi border guard units. Now, that is the Human Rights Watch report read in full, verbatim, word by word, in relation to the alleged shootings of mainly Ethiopian people trying to cross, seeking asylum or refugees or whatever their reasons, trying to cross into Saudi Arabia. And it calls for the UN to act, among other recommendations. So we don't get into the arguments, we just report what the actual report says and what they claim to be allegations, which, if proven as alleged, they claim could arguably amount to crimes against humanity because of their systematic nature, or if it's in actual fact a policy by a specific government. And so there we shall leave it on this episode of the Diary of a Lawyer. But I think the key words were for the those attributed to a 14-year-old who has been named as, or referred to as Hamadia, who says, "Were fired on repeatedly. I saw people killed in a way I've never imagined. I saw 30 killed people on the spot. I pushed myself under a rock and slept there. I could feel people sleeping around me. I realized what I thought were people sleeping around me were actually dead bodies. I woke up and I was alone." That's Hamadia, 14-year-old Ethiopian who was a survivor of the Yemen-Saudi border in what is reported widely publicly as people being fired on like rain, quote unquote. And so there we shall leave it on this episode of the Diary of a Lawyer, and we shall speak again. Thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening. Bye.